Hi and welcome back to the channel. If you've been following us for a while, you would have known a few months ago we started a journey with a car and a girl. Well, those plans have changed. It's the 22nd of March and the first rally for the year is on the 17th of April. That gives us under a month, and this, after a couple of false starts, is hopefully a step in the right direction to getting this car ready to go for the Clubman series. Now, I've talked previous videos about this car. It's a four-wheel drive WRX. It's actually a version 2. It's a 94 Australian body shell. It's had a version 6, so a 2000 engine and running gear put in it. And ideally, it is already a rally car and I would have liked to have kept it as such. However, to be able to run in the Clubman series here in Western Australia, we need to run two-wheel drive cars only, and you're not allowed to have turbocharging if they weren't factory turbocharged as a two-wheel drive car. So we are in the process of converting this thing from four-wheel drive turbo to two-wheel drive non-turbo. Now that sounds like a bit of a backwards step, and in some regards it maybe is. However, we're going to do this in such a fashion that later on this car can be converted back to four-wheel drive turbo as the driver steps up. However, we had an engine and gearbox lined up for this car initially, and it turned out after doing some compression testing that the compressions on a couple of the cylinders were rubbish. So we had to throw that motor in the bin and find another solution. And as it turns out, luckily, one of our family members actually had a spare 2-litre single overhead cam engine sitting there, and by all accounts it seems to be a good motor. I haven't had time to compression test it. We're just out of time to fool around with it any further. We just don't have time to build a motor up from scratch right now, so going to get stuck into it now. I think it may have had a new cam belt in it at some point in the past. However, there's some moisture that got in there into the pulleys, and not willing to risk it, whether it's a throwaway engine or not. So change of cam belt, put a new cam belt in it, and pulleys, water pump, and sort out all the bits and pieces on it, so it'll be ready to go in. We are, however, going to use a Wrx gearbox. Now you might go, hang on a minute, Wrx gearbox is four-wheel drive. Well, yeah, that's correct. However, there is a clever mob here in Australia that engineers a solution that changes the four-wheel drive transmission to two-wheel drive. You effectively take the the centre differential, the rear part of the gearbox out of it, and put this little insert in there and chuck it back in again. So that's what we're going to do, because the Wrx gearbox has better ratios. It's a 4-4 rather than the widely spaced two-wheel drive gearbox, so it'll give the car better acceleration, just better gear ratios in general. Also has an LSD in the front, which will help out a fair bit, and on top of that it's got a hydraulic clutch in it, being a WRX, whereas the standard two-wheel drive gearbox is only a cable clutch, so we don't have to convert pedal box and all the rest of it. We've got a lot to do in a very short space of time. Okay, so another job to get out of the way is to change the engine mounts. The standard factory rubber engine mounts in these are not particularly expensive. They're pretty cheap. They're about $20 or $30 each. However, the rubber on them is quite soft, and it's quite common for these things to split. Surprisingly, these engine mounts are actually in quite good condition. More so, we see them in the turbocharged engines. The WRX tends to blow the engine mounts a lot more. They just sort of split all the rubber off, and that's the end of them. Then the whole motor twists around. So instead, we use these engine mounts, and you can probably see there's not a great deal of difference in looking at them. However, this particular brand is a hard race brand one, only because I couldn't get the Subaru, what they call Group N or STI engine mounts. They're made of a firmer rubber, and they've got a much stronger bonding. Basically, you put a set of these in and they're set and forget. You can get these in engine and transmission mounts. At the time, I couldn't get the genuine Subaru one, so I used hard race. I ordered some hard race ones as well, which you can order online, and they both do the same job. It's a very easy job to replace these when the engine's out of the car. When the engine's in the car, it's a bit more of a prick of a job. It takes a couple of hours to get them out, particularly the right side one in a turbo engine behind the exhaust there. It's usually easier to drop the dump pipe off and the drive shaft out to get in there and do it. But anyway, we'll change these out, and that'll be another task ready to go. Okay, so we'll change over to a bit of voiceover here, because the guys in the panel shop that are next door are making a fair bit of racket with the angle grinder and swinging the hammer. They must need to bang out some pretty bent something or other there. So The next task was to then get the engine and transmission out of the car, drop it all out of the bottom is the easiest way, so under the bonnet to begin with. And also while we were doing that, we found a few other problems that needed to be dealt with, like the front brake pads were completely shot. They're all cooked and cactus, so we'll have to put a new set of pads in there. The rears are not much better either. Also discovered that the right hand side ball joint was ready to fall out, and the right hand side tie rod was not very good either. Having a quick look underneath the car, and despite the fact that it's a bit muddy and dirty under there, even after a good pressure clean, it's actually in fairly good shape. So all of the bolts, apart from needing a bit of a spray with rust penetrant, were all pretty good, and it should all come out okay. And this is the final stages of dropping the engine and transmission out of the car. It comes out pretty straightforward once you undo everything and get it all disconnected. Yes, the engine and gearbox are strapped on tightly to the transmission jack, and the jack is rated to take the weight. Once we got everything safely onto a pallet, then it was time to separate the engine and gearbox and have a look at the clutch inside. Right, so that's the gearbox out and on the bench ready to be stripped. Let's take a look at this clutch and see what's going on in here. Jesus. Well, the clutch is not quite down to the rivets. However, I don't know whether the camera can see that. I'll bring that up here. Certainly, this is bad. So that clutch is shot. So I'll need a new clutch for sure. That drive plate's broken. That's lucky that hasn't failed. I thought it was a looking a bit suspicious when I pulled the pin out, and there was so much dust and carbon build up in there. So it may have been a performance clutch at some point, but that is stuffed. That pressure plate actually surprisingly doesn't look too bad. That probably could be tested in machine, but I think it'll just be easier to put a new clutch on. The flywheel, oh, it's got a few cracks. Also the pilot bearing for the flywheel hasn't actually been put in far enough. It's actually sitting proud by about 3 millimeters all the way around, so whoever put the clutch in this didn't quite get it right, which may possibly be why the clutch is cracked. Anyway, didn't think we'd be able to use that clutch, so I'm not surprised. All right, onwards and upwards. Okay, so it's day 4, and this has been a fair bit of a task. Thankfully, the engine and gearbox is now in the car, and there's been a few new bits and pieces fitted, as you've seen. Also behind the scenes, didn't show putting the actual engine and gearbox back in again. It's pretty much the same as taking it out. Have discovered quite a few other bits and pieces from a bit of a lack of maintenance that needed to be sorted out here. The two-wheel drive conversion kit is proving to be very troublesome. It started off, it should be a straightforward thing, and there's really only 2 parts to it in order the kit. It's an Australian-made kit. However, the instructions are not very clear. They're missing quite a few steps in there, and there's a few mistakes in there. Also, the plate that goes on the back of the gearbox, the blanking plate, that turned out to be wrongly drilled. The holes weren't the right size, and that proved to be a bit of a drama. Also, couldn't use the factory bolts from the rear housing of the gearbox like it says in the instructions. So that was another drama. Had to hunt around and find some bolts to sort that out. That should have been an inclusion in the kit, and somebody should have worked that out. Also now we've got problems with the shifter. The actual shift mechanism itself connects up. However, the stabilizer support, now there's the gap there and it doesn't fit. So now we're going to have to fabricate up a plate or a bracket for that to sort that out, and that's something that should be sorted in the kit. I'm presuming maybe that a lot of people that buy this particular kit are possibly using it into a Volkswagen conversion for beach buggies or something like that, and perhaps they don't need it because they're modifying the gear shift mechanism to suit. However, into a Subaru, it should be a straightforward bolt in and away you go, and unfortunately it's not. So be aware if you do buy this kit that it's not going to be a straightforward job to fit it. Anyway, now we're really down to the nitty-gritty to start connecting everything up and plumbing it all up. However, there is also a big concern with the electrics to go yet. That's going to take a bit of time. This project is really taking longer than I had anticipated, but anyway, it is well on its way. So fingers crossed we can make some real progress on it today and at least get everything bolted in, get the rear diff out and drive shafts, get all that stuff sorted out, and then it will be down to just tackling the electrical, and then we can get this thing running. All right, let's get on with it. Okay, this is something that I wanted to show you that we've discovered that we now have to rectify. Right here, as you can see, this is a plate. Basically, this is the bolt-on plate for a roll cage. This car has a bolt-in cage in it. We've talked about that in previous episodes with bolt-in roll cages. They work perfectly effectively. I'll maybe leave a link in the description or somewhere in this video for that. However, I wanted to talk about this because this is actually incorrect. Now, I've actually seen quite a few videos where people are installing bolt-in roll cages, some Australian brands, even some Australian YouTube channel people have been doing it, which is fine. There's no problem with using bolt-in cages, but putting the bolts through from the bodywork through the interior of the car to the outside, this is an absolute no-no. Now, it's probably not that easy to see, but this bolt is bent. It's actually almost sheared. Basically, what happens is if you have the bolts sticking through down onto the floor or to the road of the car, anything that comes underneath the car can then catch these bolts and potentially shear them off. This one's bent, so what we're going to have to do now on this cage on all of the plates, it's been done on all of them, is actually cut all the bolts off and put all brand new bolts in and spin them around so that the bolts go upwards. So all you've got is a flat head and a washer underneath the car. So much less chance of damaging that or catching it on something and tearing it off. Also, with the threads sticking through like this, these are just completely rusted and corroded, so I very much doubt, even if we tried to get them undone, that they would actually come undone. They'd more than likely snap. So, of course, roll cage being such a safety item, the last thing you want to do is have the bolts snap out or shear off that are holding the cage into the car. All right, so another thing to add to the list to get sorted out now. Before we get to the end of this video, one more thing that we got sorted out was to remove the rear diff completely out of the car. So unbolted that and took that all out, and the rear drive shafts. However, separated the drive shafts off the outer CVs because the outer CV is still required to hold the hub together. So they've gone back in again with the nut on the outside and tightened up. Okay, back in the office to finish the video off, and my trusty assistant Jack is hanging on to the camera, so hopefully it's not too wobbly, because I left the tripod in the workshop. Thanks very much for watching this video. It is going to be a to be continued. There's still a fair bit of work to go yet, so we'll have to keep pushing on with that now, and time is getting very short, so we'll really keep cracking on. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheers.